Coming up on today's show, here are two weaknesses the Cavs still have as we look ahead to next season. Plus, Danny Green talked and didn't seem happy. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
The music you heard on the way in is from our friends at Astro Radio. This weekend, by the way, they're going to be playing at Terrestrial Brewing outdoors. I will be there. If you happen to be there just for dinner or go to see Astro Radio or eating a good company over there as well, come say hi. I'll probably be wearing some kind of hat, probably Akron Rubber Ducks hat. I'm Chris Manning, covering the Cavs and the NBA for outlets like SB Nation, Cleveland Magazine, and the Just Basketball Show. As always, we have Jake Stevens on production. Evan Damerl is not with us today. Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, today's show is going to be two segments about the Cavs' weaknesses. Two segments about what is going on with the two things that I think could really impact Cleveland next year. And then Danny Green talked about his time in Cleveland, and he didn't seem to love it. So we're going to talk about it. It's August, baby. And here we are. If you missed yesterday's show, that was all about Ricky Rubio and him stepping away. Dive in. So weakness number one is rebounding. This is something we have hit on a ton. This is something we have hit on quite a bit. You have the whole playoff series against the Knicks. You can look at and say, oh, right, rebounding for this team was bad. Rebounding for this team got out-physicaled. JB Bickerstaff recently did an interview with Chris Fedor of Cleveland.com, and he straight up said, what I also look at is we were out physical for most of that series. I thought game 2, which we won, we were the more physical team. But when you're out physical, it is difficult for your skill set and challenge to show. That straight up reflects, I think, one of the concerns about the Cavs. I think that straight up reflects one of the real issues with what this team is. And this isn't a team with overwhelmingly different personnel. In fact, you look at the personnel they did add, you go to George Niang, you go to Max Strus, they didn't add plus rebounders, right? Like now Niang might, I'm curious to see if he's someone who boxes out well and maybe like is better than we think because he was playing with Joel Embiid, who just gobbles up rebounds. So maybe he is better, but this is someone that for his entire career on field goal defensive rebounding has never been close to league average. He was with Rudy Gobert before Joel Embiid. So like, is there something there? Maybe. I'm curious to see that, but that's not a good positional rebounder for a guy who plays the 4 for you. That would make me feel great about improving as a rebounder if that's someone that's going to be part of your rotation. You go to Max Strus, a sign and trade that I love. He has one season with Miami in 21-22 where he was a good above average for his position defensive rebounder on field goals. Last year below average. The year before that below average for a wing. So where does the truth lie? It's the data would tell you he's not a great defensive rebounder. Merely okay. So, okay, let's see what that looks like. And then you get to someone like Evan Mobley. This is one of the weaknesses in Evan Mobley's game in terms of rebounding. He did drastically improve last year statistically. Drastically is maybe a little bit strong, but he goes from the 44th percentile as a rookie on field goals defended off of misses, then up to the 67th percentile up from that. He's above average both years in his career on defensive rebounding on free throws. He had above average offensive rebounding rate last year, or at least on missed free throws, still a little below average on missed field goals. Evan Mobley takes a step up as a rebounder, and maybe he doesn't get cooked as much in those lineups where he plays the 5, this issue could solve itself. You go to Jared Allen, this is a guy that nominally does do a good job rebounding. He is, for his career, a pretty upper echelon rebounder in terms of offensive rebounds. He's well above average in defensive rebounds. About even on free throws last year, which is a drop off for him based on the rest of his career for the most part. That's like one guy you have that's a solid enough rebounder. We're not seeing Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, right? Like go and get tons of rebounds. You go to Mitchell specifically, good offensive rebounder off of free throws for a guard. Last year was actually the second highest percentage he had on defensive rebounding off of missed field goals. That's kind of interesting, but it didn't obviously matter when you got to the playoffs. And the Cavs do give up a lot of offensive rebounds. At least they did last year. So I would go into next season, and if I'm looking at what this roster is, what this team is, I'm a little skeptical about the rebounding. I'm a little skeptical that this is an issue that has been addressed and fixed. I think the way it looks better is Evan Mobley takes it forward and Jared Allen has a really good year and that fixes it. And maybe George Niang is better than you would expect. And maybe Max Strus is better than you expect. But this is something we are going to need to see it happen before we can validate it, right? I don't think this is something we can look at and say, oh, this is a good rebounding team. We can't say that right now. We can't look at this group and say, this team is actually a good rebounding team. This team is actually physical. This team is actually about that life in that way. We need to see it. We need to see Evan Mobley take that step forward. We need to see Jared Allen, I think, not get punked like he did in the playoffs, to be honest. We need to see Dean Wade be a competent rebounder. We need to see George Niang be a competent rebounder. This team's best defensive rebounder, arguably last year, was Kevin Love. And then he got bought out and then did some stuff with Miami, and we'll need to rehash that again. We're just in a spot where the Cavs have to prove this. The Cavs have to show up in a different way, and we'll see if they do it. I think that's largely what's going to go on here. I would bet on Evan Mobley being better at it. I would bet on him being a better version of himself this year, but we have to see it to believe it. Coming up next, wing defense. Do the Cavs have answers for the league's apex predators? We'll talk about that coming up after this. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Gotta tell you, FanDuel is awesome, and football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, even the Cleveland Browns, if you want to do that, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl. That's it. And you win a bonus bet for every victory. So you can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. All of that, again, is when you pick a team to win the Super Bowl. Right now, go place a futures bet on a team to win it all. You get a bonus bet every time they win. How cool is that? So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning those bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Back here on Locked On Cavs, I'm Chris Manning. Jake Stevens is always on the ones and twos. I guess that's what we're calling it. Thanks again for making us, by the way, your first listen every day, everydayers. Back tomorrow talking about the Hall of Fame, talking about why it's cool and why I think we should care about it more, and the Cavs who could become Hall of Famers. There's certainly some locks, and certainly some guys now that I think will be in contention when their careers come and go. So we will see. All right, so wing defense is to me maybe the most interesting tactical one to consider. Rebounding is interesting. I think it's really important, but the wing defense part of this to me is a tactical question that I'm curious to see how they decide to answer it. The obvious answer to this is just to say Evan Mobley is going to guard these guys. And I think we've seen versions of that, right? I think one of the Miami games from last year featured Evan Mobley guarding Jimmy Butler, and they're saying Evan's going to guard Jimmy. Good luck attacking him. And I think it largely worked. I think if they didn't face a team like the Knicks and maybe they got Boston, or, you know, in a big regular season game against a team from the West like the Suns with KD, or LeBron with the Lakers, or Kawhi and PG, right? I think there are games you could look at and say this could really happen. But there's also some changes to your defensive scheme when you do that. And it's not something you can just run out for the entire 30, 35 minutes that Mobley is going to play, right? For one, it's just a different question when Jared Allen's on the floor, or maybe Damian Jones, if you got backup center minutes in there, versus Mobley by himself. If Mobley is by himself and he is the only big, and let's just say it's Mitchell, let's say it's Garland, LeVert, Strus, Dean Wade, Mobley. Let's just say that's the five. Evan Mobley in that lineup cannot be chasing around Jason Tatum or chasing around pick your wing scorer du jour, right? Jimmy Butler. He can't really do that. His job in that situation is going to be to protect the rim. His job in the situation is more traditional big man stuff. His job in that position is to be in a spot where he has to play center. As much as we are in a positionless NBA, as much as we are in a position where what guys do and switching and everything has really changed a lot of things, that's one thing that is still true. There's a reason the Minnesota Timberwolves talked themselves in to all that money, all the draft picks and stuff for Rudy Gobert. They're like, oh, a center who blocks shots. Great, let's go for it. Now, was that stupid? Yes. Mobley is not going to be that kind of center. He's going to be a little more evolved and modern than that. But he is in those situations having to protect the rim. He has to do that. So that limits how often he can do that. And in those situations, if they're defending a wing, Dean Wade will probably get a shot. I think he's a better option than Niang. I don't think Niang's really up for that kind of assignment. Maybe they'll try it. Strus, I think, is someone that's going to get that. I think Karis LeVert's going to get that. And if I'm JB Bickerstaff, I'm a little queasy about that. Let's just say it how it is. Those are not guys that you're going to feel great about making those lead scorers work. Strus is someone that is going to make those guys, like, he's going to move his feet. He's going to play physical. I don't suspect that there's going to be an effort and like focus drop off from him coming out of Miami. Next week, we'll have David Ramil on from Locked On Heat for a Max Strus scouting report. I'm very excited about that. But we'll pick his brain on that in a little more, let's say. But he's not someone that you're going to say, hey, opening tip, big game, second round of the playoffs, Jason Tatum, defend him. And that's not going to be an answer for you. That is not something you can depend on. So is it Karis LeVert? You kind of know what that is. I don't think Niang has the foot speed for it. Dean Wade is okay at it, but he's not someone that's really stopping guys. Mobley's kind of your best answer, but it really only works in certain circumstances when you have another big on the floor and he doesn't have to be the guy in the paint. I would argue right now that the best version of Mobley on defense is the one who does get to roam and do all that stuff. I think he hasn't quite evolved into being that defensive five in that way anymore. Or yet, I should say. We'll see if he gets there. I think he will get there, but let's see if it's this year. So you're left with one really interesting option, and you're left with a bunch of options that you have to kind of squint and cross your fingers and pray a little bit, at least in terms of man-to-man defense. I am really curious to see, I know we don't know the schedule yet, but the first big game of the season, the first time they play Boston or the first time they play the Lakers or whomever has one of these big wing scorers, Miami. Do they just go right to Evan Mobley on him and build the defense around that? I'm really curious to see if they go that route. I think there's a lot of reasons to go that route. I think it's your best version and just let Jared Allen defend the paint. It does put pressure on Jared Allen to rim protect and to rebound and all that stuff. But you know what, Jared Allen, you're making $20 million. You made an all-star team. Maybe you got to redeem yourself after that debacle and you getting punked in the playoffs. Okay, let's see if you can do it. The other option here, I think, is something we did not see a lot of last year in that zone. Mobley's rookie year featured this zone that they used where Mobley's is a 3-2, Mobley's at the top of the key, and he's roaming, and he's defending shooters, and he's everywhere. There are teams, the Celtics, where you get him against the zone, and they're going to start taking threes, and you're going to force them, and you're not as necessarily scared of Tatum or someone else driving in you. So there's a part of that where you can hide some of your deficiencies, build this zone around Mobley, it's like a KG zone, right? And then you do that, and it kind of works, and it was really effective. And you can build something around that for stretches. I don't know if that's not going to be your base defense. That's not going to be something that works for every opponent. But it should, to me, be in the toolbook, and they didn't do it last year. And I don't know why. It's a failure on my part as someone who is interested in that stuff to not ask why they didn't do that. I am curious to see why they didn't do that. This is on my list of questions of why that zone kind of faded away. My guess would maybe be they felt they were a little bit small. I think they probably felt some of the wings they had just weren't physically up for some of the responsibilities in it. Maybe that changes this year. Maybe because you have, Niang isn't the most fleet of foot, but he's solid, will move his feet enough to maybe just cut guys off at times. I think you could talk yourself in to that being an option. But this to me is one of the bigger holes. I think rebounding coming off the playoffs is number one. This to me is my number two question. I think they've addressed shooting. Backup guard is kind of an open question just because of the Rubio stuff. I think offensive flow is always kind of a question, and that's worth really unpacking. But I think wing defense and what the answers for some of these Apex Predators is built into what this roster is. Probably should have led earlier with this, if I'm being honest. I'm going to edit myself here. But when you have Garland and Mitchell, who I really like as a duo, there's a ton of offensive firepower. There's a lot of synchronicity in those two offensively. But when you have two small guards who can get picked on, you have to have creative answers to stop these big wings who are going to hunt those two guards. So what are the answers? Is it Mobley? Is it zone? Is it someone steps up? Do they try to make another trade at some point to go get that guy? At least or a cheap version of it. Can you flip Dean Wade and some picks for a $6 million version of that guy? I don't know, but I'm curious to see what their answers try to be, what they try to pursue here. Particularly because, Lamar Stevens is gone. I really like Okoro. I'm still an Okoro believer, but how much are they going to play him? Because he could be an answer for you in this as well, at least in certain cases. There's just a lot of questions here about what this looks like. I think it starts with Evan Mobley. It goes from there, and we'll see where it ends up. All right, coming up, Danny Green. Not particularly happy about how his time in Cleveland went. Let's talk about it after this. All right, coming back in, I'm Chris Manning. Thanks to Jake Stevens for his work on production. Danny Green was on a podcast recently. I'm going to get the name. I believe the reporter's name is Emily Austin. He said he was left in a, quote, weird space last season. It's the Hoop Chat with Emily Austin. He gave this interview on there. Danny Green also, by the way, does have his own podcast. So he said it was a great full circle moment. It meant a lot about how it felt to come back and play for the team that drafted him. Here's his full quote, or at least part of it, and I'll read this to you. It was just tough being in that position. There was a lot of weird air of not knowing what was going on, what was happening, what my role was going to be, or what it was. There were talks differently before I got there. What my role was going to be or what it was. There were talks differently before I got there than when I got there. Ultimately, in the time I thought I was going to get my opportunity to actually play throughout the regular season, I caught COVID. Then he was asked, was COVID why he didn't play much with the Cavs? Not really, Green said. Decisions that were not made by me is why I was not able to play or show that I was healthy. I played at the end of the season and the playoffs came, and he, in reference to JB Bickerstaff, wanted to stick with his guys. So he stuck with his guys. But that left me in this weird space of people not knowing if I was healthy or not. So look, I don't think the version of Danny Green Cleveland got was going to be someone that actively changed your trajectory against the Knicks. Danny Green at this point in his career, and he said he still wants to play, is not someone that is going to entirely change your fortunes. Danny Green is not in a position where he was actually like a phenomenal 3-and-D guy anymore. This is a potential Hall of Famer. This is a 3-time champ, one of the best locker room presidents in the league. This is someone that is just considered a great basketball person. This is someone that like is adored around the league. So I don't think like he was necessarily coming off of the injuries and his age going to be the exact version that you might have traded for when he was with the Spurs. If you remember, the Cavs had some interest in him when he was still in San Antonio, and LeBron was back, right? So that like it's not even that kind of guy. It's not the guy that helped the Lakers win the title in the bubble. But this strikes me as just one of these things, like there's something just off here in the communication. And I don't know where that goes to. I don't, is that on JB? Is that on him not communicating to Danny from the get-go? It's like, this is my plan for you. This is why I'm not going to play you a ton. Did he have different views on Danny Green in the front office? Did Kobe Altman tell his agent something that was different than what happened or what was promised? Was something different promised? I don't know. We're not going to get answers to this. We're not going to get answers as to exactly everyone's perspective. This is not really how this works. It's not worth airing dirty laundry out over all the time. So, like, okay. Sure. To me, this is just one of those things where I think the people part of it does come through. I think we sometimes forget in sports and in sports media and thinking about results more than anything else, that this is a people business. This is a situation where there is some relationships. This is about giving people an opportunity to succeed. This is a highly competitive environment. We don't obviously know, like communication all the time between coaches and players. Even media doesn't get the full, media with good access doesn't always get the full insights into that. We know even less about how front offices talk to people. There are just times sometimes with Cleveland that they just come across looking as not always being great with the people. I mean, Kevin Love had legitimate gripes as far as he was concerned, his perspective on it. And look, we do ultimately get the players' perspective more than the front offices and things. So take that for what it's worth. They're in a situation there where like it just sometimes feels like there's sometimes lacking of communicating what is going on, what the expectations really are. And it like doesn't help you to be in the business of the NBA and have someone like Danny Green kind of tell you, like, come out and say, I didn't really understand like what was going on after Kevin Love left, and like that I don't think was super viewed as positively to some degree. I know Dean Wade gave an interview about that recently. I haven't listened to it. I probably should, but okay. It just feels like Green got left in limbo here by JB, maybe by the organization, by someone. Like something in the communication here broke down. And then Danny Green is in this spot where people don't know if he's healthy. He did have COVID, and like that was just kind of like, okay, we don't really talk about that, right? Like all this was just kind of weird. And ultimately, was he going to swing the Knicks series again? I don't think he was. I don't think Danny Green at 36 was going to change your trajectory. I think he gave them some good minutes. He only hit 1 3 in 40 minutes. So like, okay, like that's not, whoop-de-doo. Didn't exactly help you. I would have brought him back just from a leadership perspective, right? If you could have him be like a veteran guy who plays randomly for you, I would be totally good with that if I'm Cleveland. But there's just something off here with this communication. We're never going to get clean answers on this. It's not for me to like totally figure that out or get that. And like, you won't. But if I'm a player, I look at that and that rubs me a little bit the wrong way. And I as a media person, I think fans as well look at this and just get a little confused about how something like that happens. I think baseline level, if you're in my kind of job, if you're a worker anywhere, if you're an NBA player, if you're a coach, being upfront and clear with people and having really good communication is number one. Treating people like people and having clear expectations for them and knowing what they're getting into should be number one at all times to me. I think just being upfront and clear with people and just getting everyone on the same page is number one of a great organization. And sometimes with the Cavs, it doesn't always feel like that happens. Maybe that's unfair, but to me, I read the Kevin Love stuff, the J.R. Smith exit. There's sometimes to me this feels like this happens messier than it should with the Cavs. And maybe I'm wrong. You could tell me I'm being a hater, but to me, sometimes I read stuff like this. I hear Danny Green talk about this on the Hoop Chat with Emily Austin. And thanks to Mike from Fear the Sword for pinging me on this and getting a blog up about this over there. Just weird. It's weird. I like Danny Green, feel like I'm in a weird space with stuff like this. All right, let's end there. I'm Chris Manning. Thanks again to Jake Stevens for production. Next up, Hall of Fame talk. Hope you guys tune in for that one.